We're going to do rapid fire, you guys, to make as much use of this lunch hour as we can. So David's a principal at Osage University Partners. I think a lot of you know him. It's a venture capital firm that deals exclusively with universities. Before joining Osage, David was a lead engineer at Lockheed Martin and a research engineer at, David, did you say that ACIN?
It's ACIN.
ACIN. At ACIN, which you say ACIN, Camden Technology Center in Camden, New Jersey. David has a PhD in electrical engineering from Drexel University, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This has been a really good event so far. Thanks.
Oh, awesome. That's what we're aiming for. And you know, don't you think having Tim Honecker in the break room makes the whole event?
I think it's fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad to see Tim. I'm really glad to see that you're eating healthy. I think that's fantastic.
So David, just for starters, can you tell us at Osage kind of what technology areas you focus on?
Yeah, so I would say the things I'm most interested in fall under a big bucket called data and systems, and IoT would fall under that as well. Don did a really good job of kind of showing, describing how the value in new sensing modalities is that once it gets pushed up the stack and it gets correlated with other data, it has analytics performed on it, it's stored in some back end. You have to think about all of the things about securing it, storing it, analyzing it, extracting value from it. And so anything like networking, databases, distributed microservices, analytics, including anything in machine learning, like all of that, I think kind of falls into my area of interest. But then there's lots of other things that I'll step off and look at. I was a lead on one of our quantum computing investments as well. So I have a lot, broad interest, but I think my basic interest is in this kind of data and systems.
So awesome. A nice follow from Don, right? I didn't even realize we were going to have such a good transition, but you and I have talked about one of the big differences you see between the coasts and the Midwest, and it's the prevalence of use cases. You see them used a lot more on the coasts, and let's dig into that. But just to kind of get started, can you define a use case for us?
Yeah, I want to be clear about this. So when I'm talking about a use case, I'm talking about a business use case. And that means that it is a application of some technology or idea towards increasing revenue for some business, or dramatically decreasing costs, or letting them more efficiently bring on customers. So a business use case is something that a company actually cares about because it could bring them new money. And so we work with over 100 universities around the world, and I see a lot of faculty startups. And very often, I think what's missing is use cases are not easy to come by, and they're also not intuitive. You can't just sort of sit and think a lot and say, "Oh, I found a use case." Like it has to be from lots and lots of customer discovery conversations. So anyway, just to be clear, like a use case for me is one where you could claim that you can increase revenue or profits for a stakeholder.
So it's kind of the problem you're solving in a way, right? The business.
Yeah, and the only reason why I don't say it's a problem you're solving, because people, businesses have problems that don't create new revenue or profit, and so a business use case is the one that actually affects their bottom line. And I'm talking mainly about B2B kind of companies, enterprise companies.
So if in these use cases, there's not really like an ask for money to begin with. It's a discussion of
to discover a use case, what you're really doing is you're having a conversation with a large company who has lots of divisions, lots of different sectors, and things that you can't see, and you're asking them, what are some problems that you have internally that you're trying to solve on your own dollar? And one of the things with large enterprises is that their billable hour is really high, and so there's lots of projects where it's just not worth it for them to do it. And so it's not clear, like you can't look at their website or their S1 or anything in the public and understand like what their like troublesome, tricky use cases are right away. It's not obvious unless they expose them to you. And so you have to have a conversation, but it can't be like the way to limit that conversation really quickly is to go to them and say, here's this thing I make, would you buy it? And so like what you're doing is you've like already cut off any opportunity to find out like what are the problems that they have, because I'm sure you can't come up with them on your own. You just can't. And so one of the things you do see a lot, and this sort of maybe jumps into some of the later questions, but you alluded to it, is that in really dense populations where there's lots and lots of universities all in one place, take Boston, for example, you will have people who are working on a database solution, but they're talking to people who work in pharma or in a genomics project at the Broad Institute. And they realize like, hey, I have a layout engine that actually would solve their problem and allow them to more quickly analyze genomics data. That never would have come up by just sort of dreaming about how you could apply your technology to something in healthcare. It's just sort of one of the benefits of like, some of the coast cities. It's just that, there's population density and there's lots and lots of enterprise all in one space. And so they tend to mingle.
So University of Chicago is trying to figure out how to be a quantum hub. They've pulled in some university. I think Wisconsin's one of them.
Yeah.
Let's pretend we're in Boston. How would Boston go about becoming a quantum hub?
Well, I mean, just to sort of, I'd rephrase the question a little bit. So first of all, Chicago is actually successfully bringing together lots of like really smart people in creating a quantum hub. They're doing a great job, and I've gone there and I've spoken and I've met with them. And the thing is, the way that it would probably play out in Boston, and this isn't just true for a quantum computing company. If I was to take any company, so you take a quantum computing company, and there's a bunch of researchers that start at a university. They're building a quantum computer, or maybe they have some algorithms that operate on quantum computers. And if I was to look at them 6 months later and find out what their initial use cases were, if they were in New York City, they'd probably be working on some fintech problem. If they're in Boston, they're probably going to be working on some drug discovery problem, or maybe they're going to be working on a material discovery problem. If they're on the West Coast, they're probably doing speed up for some machine learning that is like, an NP hard, combinatorial problem.
And I think the Midwest.
And if in the Midwest, like that's the thing, like it's not clear to me. Like it's not clear to me exactly. And so I think there's lots of applications, and maybe there's the best technology there, but there isn't an obvious sector that I would say like, oh, they're probably going to start working on this, right? And that's not, I'm not sure how to fix the problem, right? And I'm not even sure to what degree that's the only challenge. It's the challenge everywhere. But to say like, because another part of your question was saying like sort of how would Boston do it? And I'm not sure that Boston does anything. Like I'm not sure that I think they have the benefit of having lots of people closely packed together and universities sitting right next to one another alongside big enterprises, and friends go out to lunch and dinner and they talk about their job, and the next thing you know they're working on projects together. So I don't know that they have to work as hard to foster it, but I do think there's a little bit more space between people, enterprises, and the universities in the Midwest. And I think that you probably have to do some extra work to foster those.
One of the things we're trying to facilitate here. So have you worked with Midwestern companies that have done a good job of developing, working on use cases? Driving?
Well, let me clear, because I guess the one I have in mind, any successful company in the Midwest has done a good job at finding use cases, or they wouldn't be one. So like we're investors in a Northwestern spinout called NewMat, and NewMat found a use case. I mean, they do metal organic frameworks, and anybody knows anything about this space, there's about 1 million MOF startups that are struggling to find a business use case. These guys, Ben did a fantastic job in talking with Versoon and finding a use case where they could actually use MOFs to store very expensive, high-value gases that are used in the electronics industry at sort of ambient pressure so that they don't implode. And they did a fantastic job. But that wasn't local in the region. I would say like another one I'm thinking about is, a startup that has gone in their neighborhood and found out like what are your problems and how can we solve them. Is a company another one out of Northwestern that we spoke to called Azul 3D. It's a 3D printer company, and we're invested in another 3D printing company. It's a tough market, and a part of it is you've got to find what your initial killer use case is. And when they came to us, one of their initial use cases was as a supplement to plastic injection molding. And like when you hear that, you think, really, you're going to go after the injection molding market? It turns out, if you look in the Midwest, there is about 1,000 companies in the if you draw a circle around Chicago in the area, about 1,000 companies in plastic manufacturing. And what they did was they went to them and asked, where are you losing money? Where could you gain more money? And it found that there's some solutions that they could do, sort of low volume, high margin products that really aren't a good fit for injection molding, but would be a really good fit for a 3D printer that could operate at scale. And so I don't think like you sit there and say, oh, we made a 3D printer, let's go after the plastic injection molding market. I think what you do is you go out and you do a bunch of customer discovery by driving around to the companies that are in your area and finding out what they need.
So you're in Pennsylvania. What happened when Uber moved there? Did that result in new use cases? Did it have an impact on the startups there?
So again, let me qualify my response. I live in Philadelphia. In particular, I live in South Philadelphia, about 2 blocks from the Italian market. So like I'm about as much, in Pittsburgh as the Eagles fans like the Steelers. So I am not a resident of Pittsburgh, but I will say that I talk to a lot of companies, especially spinouts from CMU, and there are certainly startups that have benefited from relationships at Uber. I think it's a double-edged sword when you have companies like that jump in. You see this in Seattle, you see this in other places because they have a tendency to poach some of your best professors. But in the positive side, though, what you have is I've seen a few startups that started working on solving a problem that Uber had specifically in machine learning or networking or database storage or something like that, or in microservices, and then said, you know what, I think we've actually created something that other companies could all use. And they were able to leverage what they had learned working on enterprise software into a new spin-out. So I think it brings a lot of expertise. It brings a mentality about how to build commercial grade software and hardware and solutions. But on the other hand, I think there are some challenges for the universities when someone like that moves in. So I can't speak to all the dimensions in Pittsburgh, having not been from Pittsburgh, but I can certainly say that I've seen startups get off the ground that probably wouldn't have if it were not for Uber. And there are a lot of other autonomous companies that come out of Pittsburgh as well. Like Locomation is an autonomous trucking fleet solution in Pittsburgh, and clearly they could have been something else if they were born in another city or out of another university. But there's a lot of opportunity to find use cases there and to make partnerships with OEMs.
So, you and I both know how universities work. I mean, the tech transfer office might influence what researchers do, but might not be as, have you seen universities that are good at kind of getting researchers to focus on that use case idea or understand how to work with it?
I would say, the universities all understand that this is an issue. Like they all understand that these startups need an initial use case. And I think depending on your location, like it's more or less difficult for some tech transfer offices to actually make those connections. Some of them are really well staffed and they have lots and lots, they have large networks and they're able to connect them. And so, I wouldn't single out ones that are necessarily better. Some of them actually are just in a better position. They have a larger number of people in the office. They tend to be in the cities themselves, so they have lots of connections. And so I would say they all understand this use case. It's just not easy to do. Like it's not easy to do, and part of it is just because Tim and I were talking about this before. It's not clear how best to engage them. Actually, I think it's something like that we should think about solving. So if you take a large enterprise, like let's say Lockheed Martin, where I came from. So say we set up some meeting and we say Lockheed Martin's going to tell you what their top 10 problems are today. Who should they be speaking to? Should they be speaking to faculty? Should they be speaking to your entrepreneurial faculty? Should they be talking to the existing startups? Who's the best connection to make? Because what I don't think is a good idea for developing use cases is to create a bunch of paperwork and make it a really high stakes engagement instead of just like casual conversations about problems that they have, where you could say like, hey, I'm going to try to work on your problem for like the 6 months. If I came back and showed you what I came up with, like, would you be interested in doing a pilot of it? And if they say yes, that's awesome. But if you're going to like develop, if it's going to have to go through a CRADA or money has to change hands, the more friction, the harder it is to get what is a really valuable gem and doesn't require any paperwork, which is just, what are your problems inside of Lockheed Martin? Like, what are you trying to, what is it that you need to solve there?
That's awesome. We'll be back to you on this topic, I have a feeling. Thank you for sharing it all with us. And we're now moving you out of the spotlight.
Great. Well, thanks a lot.